when Silas Reed offers his name in marriage to save Abigail from murder charges. Neither expects the desperate arrangement to blossom into genuine love amid danger and new life. As they flee vengeful townspeople with a newborn son, will the family they've accidentally created be enough to heal the wounds of their past? Blood trickled down Abigail Porter's temple as she stumbled through the darkening streets of Prosperity, Montana. Behind her, angry voices grew louder. Ahead, a single lantern burned on the porch of a small cabin at the edge of town. She had nowhere else to run. The late August sun had just disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in fiery streaks that matched the panic in Abigail's chest. Her lungs burned. Her legs wobbled beneath her torn skirt. The schoolhouse was 3 miles behind her now, along with the body of Mr. Watson, the mayor's brother. His head cracked open on the corner of her desk where he'd fallen after she pushed him away. "Get the rope!" The distant shout made her stomach twist. Abigail had only been in Prosperity for 4 months. The teaching assistant position had seemed like a blessing after her parents' farm failed back east. Now it felt like a trap. She reached the cabin and pounded on the door, her knuckles leaving smears of red on the weathered wood. "Please," she gasped. "Please be home." The door swung open. Silas Reed stood there, confusion crossing his face. Most folks in town gave the silent widower a wide berth. At 36, his once handsome features had hardened into something unapproachable. Some said grief had turned him to stone after losing his wife and baby 6 years back. Others whispered that he'd driven Catherine to her grave with coldness. "Miss Porter." His eyes narrowed at her disheveled appearance. "Mr. Reed, they're coming for me?" she whispered, words tumbling out between ragged breaths. "Watson cornered me after the children left. He tried to. His hands were." She shuddered. "I only pushed him away, but he fell. Hit his head. There was so much blood. Someone saw me running, and now they're saying I killed him on purpose." Silas stepped onto his porch. In the fading light, he could make out the mob gathering down the main street, lanterns bobbing like fireflies. The sheriff stood among them, his badge catching the light. "Why come to me?" He turned back to her, genuinely puzzled. "Your cabin was closest to the edge of town," she admitted. "And I heard you once stood up to the mine owner when he tried to cheat the men of their pay." Her eyes pleaded with him. "I need help getting to the next town. The stagecoach doesn't come until—" "They'll have riders at every road by now," Silas cut in. "Sheriff Holloway is Watson's brother-in-law." Fresh tears welled in Abigail's eyes. At 24, she'd already weathered more storms than most. Her mother's early death, her father's drinking, the farm foreclosure. But nothing had prepared her for this. "What can I do?" Silas rubbed his bearded chin, mind racing. The mining town had nearly dried up after the silver vein played out 2 years ago. Half the buildings on Main Street stood empty. His own savings were almost gone. But something in the young woman's desperate situation stirred embers he'd thought long cold. "There's only one shield I can offer," he said finally. "My name." "Your name." Her brow furrowed. "Marriage," he clarified. "A wife can't be forced to testify against her husband. And a respected husband's word still carries weight, even with the sheriff." Abigail's mouth fell open. The shouting grew closer. "It needn't be real," Silas added hastily. "Just legal. Once the gossip dies down, you can go your way with enough money for a fresh start." "But why would you? I know what it's like when this town turns on you." Something dark flickered in his eyes. "We need to hurry. Justice Harper lives 2 streets over. He can perform it now before they come looking here." Abigail glanced over her shoulder at the approaching lanterns, then back at the stranger offering impossible salvation. "How long would I need to stay?" 3 months should quiet the talk. By then, Watson's family might accept it was an accident. Silas grabbed his coat from a hook by the door. "Choose quickly, Miss Porter. I'm offering the only protection I can, but I won't force it." For 5 heartbeats, Abigail stood frozen on his porch. Then she straightened her shoulders and wiped blood from her cheek with her sleeve. "Yes," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "I accept your proposal." Silas nodded once, betraying no emotion. He extinguished his porch lantern, then took her elbow, guiding her through his small vegetable garden toward the back path that would circle around to Justice Harper's home. "If anyone asks later," he whispered as they slipped between shadowy buildings. "We've been courting quietly for weeks. You've been giving me reading lessons." "Can you read?" Abigail asked, surprised enough to momentarily forget her terror. A ghost of a smile touched Silas's lips. "Well enough. But folks will believe a lonely man might pretend otherwise for a pretty teacher's attention." Abigail felt her cheeks warm despite everything. No one had called her pretty before. Certainly not a man offering marriage, however false the arrangement might be. The justice's house appeared ahead, yellow light spilling from its windows. Silas paused, turning to look at her fully for the first time. "Last chance to run, Miss Porter." In the distance, dogs began to bark. Someone shouted her name. "I'm not running anymore, Mr. Reed." She took a deep breath. "And if we're to be married, perhaps you should call me Abigail." Their eyes held for one moment longer than necessary. Then Silas nodded and knocked on the justice's door. 3 sharp raps that would forever divide Abigail's life into before and after. "Do you, Silas James Reed, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Justice Harper's bushy eyebrows lifted so high they nearly disappeared into his nightcap. The elderly man had answered his door in a flannel nightshirt, pocket watch in hand, clearly annoyed by the late interruption. But one look at Abigail's bloodied temple and Silas's grim expression had silenced his complaints. Now the 3 of them stood in Harper's cramped parlor, the only light coming from a sputtering oil lamp that cast giant shadows on the floral wallpaper. Outside, the voices had grown closer. Any minute now, the search party would reach this street. "I do," Silas said firmly, his calloused hand surprisingly gentle as it held Abigail's trembling fingers. "And do you, Abigail Louise Porter?" A heavy knock at the front door cut through the justice's words. Abigail's heart hammered against her ribs. Silas squeezed her hand once, a silent promise. "Finish it," he murmured to Harper. "Quickly." The justice nodded, skipping ahead. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife." He thrust a pen at Silas. "Sign the certificate. Both of you." As Abigail scrawled her new name in shaky letters, the knocking came again, harder this time. "Harper, open up." "Sheriff's business." Justice Harper glanced anxiously between the newlyweds and the door. "You'd best answer that, or they'll think something's amiss." Silas pulled his mother's silver band from his pocket, too large for Abigail's slender finger. Without a word, she tore a thread from her petticoat and wrapped it around the bands inside, creating a makeshift solution. The ring slid on, secure now. "Just follow my lead," Silas whispered, then nodded to Harper, who opened the door with an exaggerated yawn. Sheriff Holloway filled the doorframe, his substantial belly straining the buttons of his vest. 2 men with rifles flanked him, and beyond them, Abigail could make out at least a dozen more townspeople with lanterns and torches. "Evening, Justice," Holloway said, his gaze sliding past Harper to land on Abigail and Silas. His eyes narrowed. "Well now, what have we here?" "A wedding," Harper replied, holding up the freshly signed certificate. "Just completed the ceremony for Mr. Reed and his bride." "That right?" The sheriff's voice dripped with suspicion. He fixed his stare on Abigail, taking in her disheveled appearance and the half-dried blood on her temple. "Interesting timing, Miss Porter." "Mrs. Reed," Silas corrected, stepping forward to place himself partially between Abigail and the lawman. "And we'd appreciate you addressing my wife with proper respect." A muscle twitched in Holloway's jaw. "Your wife, is she? Since when does a man like you court the schoolmarm?" "School assistant," Abigail corrected softly. "And Mr. Reed and I have been acquainted for some time now." "Giving him reading lessons," Silas added smoothly, placing his arm around her waist. The warmth of his touch through her thin dress made her breath catch. "Thought we'd make it official before the new term starts." Sheriff Holloway's eyes hardened. "That's mighty convenient, considering Walter Watson was found dead at the schoolhouse not 2 hours ago. Miss Porter was seen fleeing the scene. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Abigail felt the room tilt beneath her feet. "My wife came directly to me after her lessons today," Silas said, his voice level. "We've been together since, planning our ceremony." "Then how do you explain the blood?" Holloway demanded, pointing to Abigail's temple. I fell," she managed, hating the tremor in her voice, "against the blackboard frame. I'm terribly clumsy sometimes." The sheriff looked unconvinced. "Watson's head was bashed in." "By whom I couldn't say," Silas replied. "But my wife and I have been together since 4 o'clock. Justice Harper can attest we arrived here at 7 to request an evening ceremony." Justice Harper, to his credit, nodded vigorously. "That's right. They've been waiting while I found my good suit." Holloway's face darkened to a dangerous shade of purple. "I don't believe a word of this charade. Watson was a respected businessman who enjoyed bothering young women when he thought nobody was looking." An unexpected voice called from the crowd. Heads turned as Clara Johnson, the midwife's daughter, pushed her way forward. At 16, she was one of Abigail's older students. "Miss Johnson," the sheriff growled, "this doesn't concern you, doesn't it?" Clara's chin lifted. "Mr. Watson cornered me behind the general store last month. Told me what a pretty figure I had. Miss Porter saw it happen and sent him on his way." Murmurs rippled through the gathered men. Several shifted uncomfortably. "That's enough," Holloway barked. "We're not here to besmirch a dead man's character. We're here for justice," someone called out. "Then perhaps you should investigate what Mr. Watson was doing at the schoolhouse after hours," Silas suggested calmly, "instead of harassing newlyweds." For a tense moment, Abigail thought the sheriff might arrest them both anyway, but the mood of the crowd had shifted. With Clara's revelation, doubt had crept in where certainty once reigned. "This isn't over," Holloway said finally, jabbing a finger toward Abigail. "Don't leave town, Mrs. Reed." He spat the name like it tasted foul. "I'll be watching you." After the door closed behind the search party, Abigail's knees finally gave way. Silas caught her before she hit the floor, his strong arms lifting her to a nearby chair. "Breathe," he instructed quietly. "Deep breaths." Justice Harper poured 3 fingers of whiskey into a glass and pressed it into her hands. "Drink this, child. Steady your nerves." The liquor burned a fiery path down her throat. "Why did you help us?" she asked Harper when she could speak again. "You must know this marriage is convenient," Harper finished, a knowing look crossing his weathered face. "I've been marrying folks in this territory for 30 years. Seen all kinds of unions for love, money, land, protection. Some of the oddest beginnings led to the strongest bonds." He glanced at Silas. "Besides, I knew Catherine. She wouldn't begrudge you finding some peace, son." Silas's expression remained unreadable, but Abigail noticed his shoulders tense at the mention of his first wife. "We should go," he said abruptly. "They'll be watching the roads, but they won't stop us returning to my cabin if we're supposedly just married." The night air had cooled considerably as they made their way through town. Prosperity had once been bustling, but now half the storefronts stood empty, their windows dark and dusty. The few people still on the streets watched them pass with curious eyes. By morning, every soul in town would know of their sudden marriage. "Will you lose your position at the school?" Silas asked as they turned onto the dirt path leading to his property. "Probably," Abigail admitted. "Married women aren't generally employed as teachers. It's considered inappropriate." "I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm alive because of you." She glanced sideways at him, studying his profile in the moonlight. "Though I don't understand why you would risk yourself this way. You barely know me." Silas was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost to himself. 6 years ago, when Catherine died, this town watched me like vultures, waiting to see if I'd drink myself to death or put a bullet in my head. Bitterness edged his words. No one offered help, just judgment. They reached the small cabin. Silas opened the door, gesturing for her to enter first into the simple one-room dwelling. A bed stood in one corner, a cookstove in another. Everything was neat but sparse, like the man himself. "I'll sleep there," he said, pointing to a pallet near the stove. "We can put up a curtain tomorrow for your privacy." The reality of their situation suddenly hit Abigail with full force. She was now legally bound to this stranger, a man whose entire worldly possessions fit into a space smaller than the schoolhouse. A man who had just tied himself to a murder suspect to save her from a lynch mob. "Mr. Reed, Silas," she corrected herself. "I don't know how I can ever repay you for this." He shook his head, already gathering blankets for his makeshift bed. "There's no debt between us. Just an arrangement." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. 3 months. We keep up appearances. Let the gossip die down. Then I'll give you money for passage east, and you can start fresh. "And you?" she asked. "What will you do after?" Something like surprise flickered across his features, as though no one had asked about his plans in a very long time. "Go on as before, I suppose." He gestured vaguely at the room. "This is enough." Abigail wasn't sure if he meant the cabin or the solitary life it represented. Either way, sadness welled in her chest for this man who expected so little from the world. "We should clean that cut," he said, changing the subject as he moved to a shelf and took down a small tin of salve. "If it scars, it might raise questions later." As Silas gently dabbed the medicine on her temple, Abigail closed her eyes. His touch was careful, almost clinical in its precision. Yet something in her responded to the human contact after months of lonely independence. "Thank you," she whispered, opening her eyes to find his face inches from hers. For a heartbeat, something vulnerable passed between them. Recognition of two souls adrift, momentarily moored to the same unlikely dock. Then Silas stepped back, the moment broken as he returned the salve to its shelf. "Get some rest, Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice deliberately formal again. "Tomorrow will bring its own troubles." Abigail nodded, too exhausted to parse the strange twist of emotion his distancing brought. As she laid her head on his pillow, surrounded by the unfamiliar scent of a man she'd just promised her life to, she wondered what sort of marriage they had truly begun, and how either of them would survive its end when the time came. I'll create Acts 3 and 4 with approximately 1,000 words each, following your guidelines for engaging storytelling with accessible language and varied conflicts. Frost patterns like delicate lace decorated the cabin windows when Abigail woke to the sound of chopping wood. October had arrived with bitter cold mornings that stung cheeks and froze breath into small clouds. 3 weeks of marriage to a stranger had passed, each day a careful dance of polite distance. Abigail wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and pushed aside the patchwork curtain they'd hung to divide the small cabin. Silas wasn't there. His blankets lay neatly folded beside the stove that needed feeding. She added wood from the dwindling indoor pile, then peered through the frosted glass. Outside, Silas swung an axe with practiced strokes, his breath visible in the dawn light. Muscles moved beneath his thin shirt despite the cold. For a man who worked at a sawmill, he seemed determined to chop his own wood rather than bring home scraps. The thought hit her suddenly. This man was her husband, yet she knew almost nothing about him. Later, as they shared a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush, Abigail gathered her courage. "The Wilson family asked if I could mend their children's clothes for winter." Her fingers twisted nervously in her lap. "I told them I would." Silas looked up, spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "You needn't ask my permission." "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you I'll be earning money." She met his eyes directly. "For when I leave." Something flickered across his face, relief, disappointment, but he simply nodded and returned to his breakfast. "The mill foreman cut wages again yesterday," he said after a long silence. "Said lumber prices are down. Will it be enough? For us to." She stopped, not sure how to finish. They weren't truly an us, just two people bound by a temporary arrangement and a legal document. "We'll manage." His tone closed the subject. That afternoon, while Silas was at work, Sheriff Holloway appeared at their door. Abigail's heart jumped into her throat when she saw his hulking figure through the window. Mrs. Reed. His greeting held mock politeness. Settling into married life, I see. What can I help you with, Sheriff? She didn't invite him inside. Just checking that you're honoring my instruction not to leave town. He peered past her into the cabin. Though I wonder if perhaps you've been considering it. We have no plans to leave Prosperity. The lie came easily. My husband has steady work at the mill. Holloway's lips curved into an unpleasant smile. Interesting you should mention that. I was just speaking with Mr. Donovan. Seems the mill might be closing after Christmas. Not enough business. He watched her reaction carefully. What will you and Reed do then, I wonder? We'll manage, she echoed Silas's words from breakfast, clutching the doorframe to hide her trembling hands. Watson's brother still believes you killed Walter deliberately. The sheriff adjusted his hat. Man's consumed by it. Keeps asking questions about you around town. It was an accident. Perhaps. Holloway's eyes narrowed. Though I've been thinking, why would a respected teacher's assistant flee the scene if it was truly an accident? Why not call for help? Abigail's mouth went dry. I panicked and ran straight to Silas Reed's cabin, a man you supposedly had been secretly courting. He shook his head. Mighty convenient. Will there be anything else, Sheriff? Ice edged her words. Not today, Mrs. Reed. Give my regards to your husband. He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. Oh, one more thing. Found something interesting at the schoolhouse yesterday. A button. Fine mother of pearl. Found it near Watson's body. He pulled it from his pocket, rolling it between his fingers. Wouldn't happen to be from your dress, would it? Abigail's hand instinctively touched her blue dress hanging behind the door, missing its third button. Many women have pearl buttons, Sheriff. Indeed they do. He pocketed it again. Good day, Mrs. Reed. When Silas returned that evening, Abigail was crying over a pot of bean soup. The sheriff's visit had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. What happened? Alarm replaced his usual reserve as he crossed to her side. Between sobs, she told him about Holloway's visit, the mill closing, Watson's brother, and the button. He's building a case against me, she finished, wiping tears with her apron. And we'll both be without means after Christmas. Silas's jaw tightened. He ran a hand through his hair, thinking. 3 months, I promised you. That takes us to the end of November. I have some savings. Not much, but enough to get you away from here before the mill closes. And leave you with nothing? She shook her head. I can't do that. The arrangement was clear from the start. The arrangement didn't account for you losing your livelihood on my behalf. Abigail squared her shoulders, decision forming. I know how to cook, clean, and sew. Mrs. Wilson paid me well today, and others will too. Let me help while I'm here. Silas started to protest, but Abigail held up her hand. I won't leave you destitute for helping me. Let me contribute to our situation. After a long moment, he nodded once. As you wish. By November's end, a strange rhythm had developed between them. Abigail's sewing brought in steady income. Silas brought home smaller wages but supplemented with game from weekend hunting trips. Their small table often held her mending work alongside his carved wooden figures, a hobby she discovered he enjoyed but rarely mentioned. These are beautiful, she said one evening, examining a delicate wooden bird. You have real talent. Just passes the time, he mumbled, though pleasure flickered in his eyes at her praise. The 3-month mark came and went without mention from either of them. The promised departure date hung between them, unspoken but ever-present. Then came the night of the first heavy snow, when Silas returned from the mill pale and sweating despite the cold. His cough, always present from years of sawdust, had deepened into something that rattled his chest with each breath. Just need rest, he insisted, waving off her concern. But by midnight, fever gripped him. Abigail placed cool cloths on his forehead as he tossed on his pallet, muttering Catherine's name in his delirium. Don't go, he pleaded to ghosts only he could see. Don't leave me alone again. Abigail held his hand through the worst of it, whispering reassurances. By dawn, the fever had broken, leaving him weak but lucid. "You stayed," he murmured, confusion in his eyes. "Of course I stayed." She squeezed his hand. "Rest now." Later, as weak December sunlight filtered through frost-covered windows, Silas watched Abigail move about the cabin, preparing broth for him and organizing her sewing work for the day. "You should have gone," he said finally. "The 3 months are up." Abigail paused, needle halfway through mending his work shirt. "I know. Why didn't you?" She considered her answer carefully. "The mill is closing. You're ill. Winter has come early. All practical reasons to delay." "Practical," he repeated, something like disappointment in his voice. "And perhaps," she hesitated, suddenly shy, "perhaps I've grown accustomed to our arrangement." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "As have I." That evening, as they sat in comfortable silence by the stove, a pounding at the door shattered their peace. Silas rose unsteadily to answer it, still weak from his illness. Clara Johnson stood on their doorstep, snow dusting her dark hair, her eyes wide with fear. "They're coming," she gasped. "Watson's brother has convinced half the town you two conspired to kill Walter. Sheriffs deputized 6 men. She clutched Abigail's arm. "They're coming tonight." The night exploded into frantic activity. Clara's warning left them mere minutes to gather essentials. Outside, a winter storm whipped snow into blinding sheets, both danger and salvation in its fury. "The back trail through Pine Ridge," Silas decided, shoving provisions into a sack. "If we move quickly, the snow will cover our tracks." "You're still weak from fever," Abigail protested, even as she rolled blankets tight. "I'm strong enough." His eyes met hers with sudden intensity. "I won't let them take you." Clara helped bundle Abigail into an extra coat. "I'll tell them I saw you heading toward the river if they question me," she promised. "Why risk yourself for us?" Abigail asked, squeezing the girl's hands. "You stood up for me when Watson bothered me. No one else ever did." Clara's young face showed wisdom beyond her years. "Besides, everyone sees how you two look at each other. It's not just an arrangement anymore, is it?" Before Abigail could respond, men's voices carried through the howling wind. Lantern light bobbed in the distance. "Go now," Clara urged, slipping out the back door. "I'll delay them." They fled into the storm, Silas leading with a small lantern dimmed to bare necessity. The wind stole their breath and numbed their faces as they struggled through drifts already knee-deep. Behind them, angry shouts faded into the white noise of the blizzard. "Where are we going?" Abigail called over the wind, clutching Silas's arm as they navigated the narrow forest trail. "Miller's abandoned hunting cabin," he shouted back. 5 miles up. No one's used it in years. The journey became a nightmare of cold and exhaustion. Twice Silas stumbled, his recent illness sapping his strength. Each time, Abigail helped him rise, her slender frame somehow finding reserves of power neither knew she possessed. After what felt like hours, a small structure materialized from the swirling white. The cabin was little more than a shack, its roof partially collapsed in one corner, but its walls blocked the savage wind. Inside, Silas immediately began clearing debris from the small stone fireplace. His hands shook with cold and fatigue as he struck flint to steel, coaxing precious flames from tinder. Abigail hung their snow-soaked outer garments near the growing fire, then wrapped them both in the dry blankets they'd carried. Huddled together for warmth, they listened to the storm howl its fury around their fragile shelter. "They'll never find us in this," she said, hope warming her voice. "By morning, our tracks will be gone. By morning, we'll need to push on north," Silas replied, practicality tempering her optimism. "This storm gives us time, not safety." As the cabin slowly warmed, Abigail noticed a wooden box protruding from rubble in the corner. Curiosity drew her to investigate. Inside lay hunting supplies, badly deteriorated, and something unexpected, a journal. "Look," she said, carefully opening the weather-stained book. dated 1879. Silas joined her, peering over her shoulder at the faded handwriting. Trapper's record, he noted, might have maps. They examined the journal together, finding indeed a crude map showing mountain passes and trails. More interesting, however, were the personal entries chronicling the lonely man's thoughts during isolated winter months. Listen to this, Abigail read aloud. December 15th. Storm lasted 3 days. Thought I might lose my mind from solitude. Realized I've spoken to no human since September. Wonder if my voice still works. She looked up at Silas. How terrible to be so alone. Something shifted in Silas's expression. Not everyone fears solitude. Do you prefer it? She asked boldly. Being alone? He stared into the flames. I grew accustomed to it. After Catherine died, people's pity was worse than their absence. Tell me about her, Abigail requested softly. If you want to. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse as he always had. But the isolation, the danger they'd fled, and perhaps the trapper's lonely words created a rare opening. She loved spring flowers, he began hesitantly. Would fill our cabin with them until I'd sneeze from morning till night. A small smile touched his lips at the memory. She was gentle but stubborn. Wanted children desperately. His voice thickened. When she got with child, she was happier than I'd ever seen her. Abigail placed her hand atop his. What happened? Difficult birth. The baby came wrong. Neither survived. His words fell like stones. The doctor said there was nothing to be done, but I've always wondered if I'd gotten help sooner. You can't blame yourself, Abigail whispered. Who else? Bitterness edged his voice. I was her husband. My duty was to protect her. Like you're protecting me now? The parallel hadn't escaped her. Silas looked at her then, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. This is different. Is it? She held his gaze. You offered your name to shield me. You risked your reputation, your livelihood. Now you're risking your life. Her heart pounded as she dared continue. Why, Silas? Our arrangement was for 3 months. That time has passed. He reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face with calloused fingers. Perhaps I'm not ready for it to end. The confession hung between them, changing everything and nothing. Before Abigail could respond, Silas suddenly tensed, his hand dropping away. Did you hear that? She listened, hearing only the storm's rage. Then, barely audible, a sound that didn't belong. A dog's bark. They've tracked us, Silas whispered, urgency replacing tenderness. We need to move. Now. They hastily gathered their belongings, but as Silas reached for the door, Abigail clutched her middle with a sudden gasp of pain. What's wrong? Alarm filled his voice. Another cramp seized her, stronger than the first. Horror dawned as she recognized what was happening, what she'd been denying for weeks. Silas, she managed, meeting his concerned gaze with terror in her own. There's something I haven't told you. Understanding transformed his features as her hands remained protectively over her abdomen. Before he could respond, the cabin door shuddered under a heavy blow. Reed, Sheriff Holloway's voice cut through the storm. We know you're in there. Open up or we'll break it down. Silas looked from the door to Abigail, trapped between present danger and the shocking revelation. In that moment, something fierce and protective flared in his eyes. Stay behind me, he commanded softly, positioning himself between her and the door. Then louder, What do you want, Holloway? Justice for Walter Watson, came the reply. Send out the woman and you can walk away from this. Silas's hand found Abigail's and squeezed once. That's not going to happen, he called back. She's my wife. In name only. Holloway laughed harshly. Everyone knows it was a sham to protect her. Not anymore, Silas replied, his voice steady as he held Abigail's gaze. And I protect what's mine. The door splintered under renewed assault. As it began to give way, Silas pulled Abigail toward the cabin's back wall. There's another way out, he whispered, pushing aside a rotting cupboard to reveal a small door, clearly the trapper's emergency exit. It leads to a ravine. Can you make it? She nodded, though fear gripped her heart, fear for herself, for the child she carried, and most surprisingly, for this man who had become more than a convenient protector. As the front door finally burst open, admitting swirling snow and angry men, Silas and Abigail slipped through the hidden exit into the raging storm. Their future uncertain, their path dangerous, but for the first time, truly facing it together. I'll create Acts 5 and 6 with approximately 1,200 words each, following your guidelines for engaging storytelling with accessible language and varied conflicts. Blood stained the snow where Silas fell. One moment he had been guiding Abigail down the ravine, and the next, a gunshot echoed through the swirling whiteness. She screamed as he collapsed, clutching his shoulder. "Keep moving," he gasped, struggling to his feet. "Don't stop." Behind them, shouts and barking dogs drove them deeper into the storm. The blizzard that had seemed so threatening now became their shield, swallowing their tracks almost as quickly as they made them. Abigail supported Silas's weight as best she could, her own body betraying her with waves of cramping pain. Each step became a battle against nature, against pursuers, against their own failing strength. There, Silas pointed with his good arm toward a dark shape looming ahead. Rock overhang. Shelter. They stumbled toward it, collapsing beneath the natural roof, just as another contraction seized Abigail. This one stronger than before. "You're bleeding," she panted when the pain subsided, reaching for his wounded shoulder. Silas winced as she pulled away his coat. The bullet had torn through flesh but missed bone. "Through and through," he muttered. Lucky. Lucky seemed the wrong word for their situation. Trapped in a deadly storm, hunted by armed men, miles from civilization, with Silas shot and Abigail facing a possible miscarriage. Yet they were alive, together, hidden for the moment. Using strips torn from her petticoat, Abigail bound Silas's wound as tightly as she dared. Her fingers worked automatically while her mind raced with the greater problem they faced. "When?" Silas asked quietly, nodding toward her middle. She couldn't meet his eyes. "Before I came to you, that night, Watson didn't just try. He succeeded." Shame colored her voice. "I didn't know until recently. I thought the sickness was fear, and then later, when I began to suspect, I told myself it couldn't be possible." Silas absorbed this information with an unreadable expression. "Why didn't you tell me? How could I?" The words burst from her. "You offered me your name, your protection, not this burden." Her hand covered her belly protectively despite her words. "I planned to be gone before it became obvious, to spare you the scandal." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the howling wind and occasional distant shouts, now growing fainter as the storm drove their pursuers back. "Rest," Silas finally said, his tone carefully neutral. "We'll need to move again at first light." Huddled together for warmth under their remaining blanket, neither slept. Abigail's discomfort increased as the night wore on, but the severe cramping gradually eased. By dawn, she realized with mixed emotions that she hadn't lost the child after all. The storm broke with the sunrise, revealing a transformed world of pristine white stretching in all directions. No sign remained of their tracks or their pursuers. "Where will we go?" Abigail asked, helping Silas stand. His face had taken on a grayish pallor, his wound clearly causing more pain than he admitted. "North," he decided after studying the clearing sky. "My cousin Isaac has a place near the Canadian border. 3 days' journey in good weather." 3 days. She eyed his injury doubtfully. "Your shoulder." "We'll have to manage," he interrupted. "We have no choice." They set off through knee-deep snow, each step an effort. Silas led silently, his jaw set against pain. Abigail followed, watching him with growing concern. Not just his physical state worried her, but the wall that had risen between them since her revelation. By midday, they'd reached a road where sled tracks cut through the fresh snow. "Logging route," Silas explained. "Easier walking, but riskier." They followed it cautiously, ready to dive into the forest at the first sign of company. Around a bend, they discovered an unexpected blessing, a small shed used for storing logging equipment. Inside, they found basic tools, a pile of burlap sacks that could serve as bedding, and most precious of all, matches and dry firewood. "We'll rest here," Silas decided, already gathering wood for a fire. "One night. You need proper rest." Abigail wanted to argue that he needed rest more, but his tone discouraged debate. While he built a fire, she fashioned a more proper bandage for his shoulder using items from their pack and cloth from the burlap sacks. "Let me check your wound," she requested when warmth began filling the small space. Silas sat stiffly as she unwrapped the blood-soaked bandage. The edges of the bullet holes had turned an angry red, heat radiating from the surrounding skin. "It's infected," she said, unable to keep worry from her voice. "I've had worse," he replied, though they both knew it for a lie. As night fell, Silas's condition deteriorated. Fever set in, bringing with it restless sleep and occasional delirium. Abigail bathed his forehead with melted snow, feeling utterly helpless as his temperature climbed. "Catherine," he murmured, eyes unfocused. "I'm sorry. So sorry I couldn't save you." "Shoo," Abigail soothed, fighting unexpected jealousy at hearing another woman's name on his lips. "Rest now. The baby," he continued, clearly lost in the past. "Our little girl." Abigail froze. "Girl," she whispered. He'd never mentioned the gender of his lost child before. "So tiny," he rambled. "Perfect fingers, perfect toes. They wouldn't let me hold her. Said it would only make it worse." Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. How could anything be worse? Compassion overcame jealousy as Abigail realized he'd never properly mourned his child, never even held her. "I'm sorry, Silas," she whispered, her own tears falling. "I'm so sorry." Mourning brought no improvement. Silas could barely stand, yet insisted they continue northward. "You'll kill yourself trying," Abigail argued, blocking the door. "We need to find help." "There's no help for us?" he shot back, frustration making his voice sharp. "Every town, every settlement will have heard about us by now. We're fugitives." "Because of me," she said quietly. "Because you tried to protect me. I made my choice." His eyes softened briefly before hardening again. "Just as you made yours not to tell me about the child." The accusation hung between them, raw and painful. "I was afraid," she admitted finally. "Afraid you'd turn me away if you knew." "Is that what you think of me?" Real hurt crossed his face. "That I'd abandon a woman carrying an innocent child?" "I don't know what to think," she cried. "I barely know you, Silas Reed. We've lived together for months, yet you've shared almost nothing of yourself. You're a stranger who gave me his name but never his trust." Her words struck home. Silas sank onto the makeshift bed, strength deserting him. "And you've given me neither," he replied quietly. "Just pieces of truth when circumstances forced them from you." They stared at each other across the small shed, the gulf between them suddenly vast despite their shared danger. Shared space, shared name. A sound outside broke the tense moment, the jingling of harness bells. Someone was coming. Silas struggled to his feet, reaching for the axe handle they'd fashioned into a walking stick. Abigail pressed her ear to the rough wooden wall. "A sleigh," she whispered. "Single horse from the sound." "Hide," Silas ordered, positioning himself near the door. Instead, Abigail peered through a crack between boards. A small sleigh approached, driven by a woman bundled in furs. No men, no dogs, no weapons visible. "It's an older woman," she reported. "Alone. Could be a trap. Or Providence." Decision crystallized in Abigail's mind. "You need medical attention. Without it, you'll die before we reach your cousin." "Abigail," he began warningly. "I won't watch you die for me." The words erupted with unexpected force. "Not for me, and not for this child." Before he could stop her, she pushed past him and stepped outside, waving her arms to attract the driver's attention. The sleigh slowed, then stopped. The fur-wrapped figure regarded Abigail warily. "Please," Abigail called. stepping forward with empty hands visible. "My husband is wounded. He needs help." The woman studied her for a long moment, then glanced past her to where Silas now leaned heavily in the doorway, fever-bright eyes watching the exchange. "Gunshot?" the woman asked calmly, her voice carrying a hint of Norwegian accent. Abigail nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "And you are running from those who shot him, yes?" The woman's shrewd gaze took in their disheveled appearance. Another nod. The woman clicked her tongue thoughtfully. "I have no love for men with guns," she said finally. "And my grandmother was a healer. Get in. Both of you." Widow Jensen's farm huddled against the elements like an old woman drawing a shawl tight. The main house, barn, and chicken coop formed a protective circle, with sturdy log walls and deeply pitched roofs designed to shed Montana's heavy snows. Smoke curled invitingly from the stone chimney as the sleigh approached. "My husband built this place 30 years ago," the widow explained as she helped Abigail support Silas toward the house. "Lars knew how to build things that last." Inside, warmth enveloped them like a blessing. The single large room combined kitchen, dining, and living areas with a staircase leading to unseen sleeping quarters above. Every surface glowed with well-worn cleanliness, polished wood, gleaming copper, crisp linens. "Bring him here," Mrs. Jensen directed, indicating a daybed near the wood stove. "Then fetch my medicine box from that shelf." Abigail helped Silas lie down, alarmed by the heat radiating from his body and the unfocused glaze in his eyes. He'd barely spoken during the sleigh ride, conserving his dwindling strength. The widow unwrapped Abigail's makeshift bandage with practiced hands. "Bad," she pronounced, examining the inflamed wound, "but not hopeless." For the next hour, the older woman worked methodically, cleaning the bullet wounds front and back, applying foul-smelling poultices, and finally wrapping Silas's shoulder with clean bandages. Throughout the procedure, Silas remained conscious but detached, responding to directions but saying nothing beyond necessity. "Fever must break before we can say if he'll mend," Mrs. Jensen stated, washing blood from her hands. "Now, girl, your turn." "I'm not injured," Abigail protested. "Not what I meant." The widow's gaze dropped meaningfully to Abigail's midsection. "How many months?" Heat flooded Abigail's face. "3, I think." "Sit. Eat." Mrs. Jensen pushed a bowl of stew into her hands. "The baby needs strength even if you don't care for yourself." As she ate, Abigail found herself telling their story, or pieces of it, carefully edited to protect both their dignities. She explained they were married, traveling north to family, caught in the storm, and attacked by robbers who'd shot Silas. Close enough to truth without revealing their fugitive status. The widow listened without interruption, her weathered face revealing nothing. When Abigail finished, Mrs. Jensen merely nodded. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow is soon enough for decisions." That night, Abigail slept fitfully in a chair beside Silas's bed, waking whenever he stirred or moaned in his fever dreams. Near dawn, his thrashing grew more violent. "No," he muttered, pushing at invisible hands. "Won't let you take her. Not her too." "Silas?" Abigail whispered, wiping his forehead with a cool cloth. "I'm here. You're safe." His eyes flew open, focusing on her face with startling clarity. "Abigail." He clutched her hand with surprising strength. "Promise me." "Promise what?" "If I don't survive this." "Don't say that," she interrupted, tears threatening. "Promise you'll keep going," he continued, ignoring her protest. "Get to Isaac's farm. Tell him I sent you. He'll help you and the child." "We'll go together," she insisted. "You just need to rest and heal." Silas's grip tightened. "Promise me. The child deserves a chance at life." Something in his intensity made her nod. "I promise." Seemingly satisfied, he released her hand and closed his eyes, slipping back into uneasy sleep. Mrs. Jensen found Abigail still watching over him at breakfast time. "You care for this man," she observed, handing her a cup of strong coffee. "He's my husband," Abigail replied automatically. "That's not what I asked." The widow's eyes held ancient female wisdom. Many wives don't care for their husbands, and many who care aren't wives. Abigail stared into her coffee, seeing her own confusion reflected in its dark surface. What did she feel for Silas Reed? Gratitude, certainly. Respect for his sacrifice. But something else had grown during their months together, something she'd been afraid to name. It's complicated, she finally said. Life usually is. Mrs. Jensen nodded toward Silas. His fever broke an hour ago. He'll likely recover. Relief flooded through Abigail with unexpected force. Silas slept deeply through that day and the next, his body focused on healing. When he finally woke properly, his eyes were clear though his face remained gaunt. How long? He asked, voice rusty from disuse. 3 days, Abigail answered, helping him sit up. Mrs. Jensen saved your life. He glanced around the comfortable farmhouse. Where are we? About 40 miles north of Prosperity, according to our host. Abigail kept her voice low, though the widow had gone to tend her animals. She doesn't know we're running from the law. Silas nodded, absorbing this information. We'll need to move on soon. Not until you're stronger, she countered firmly. His mouth opened to argue, then closed as he studied her face. You look better, he said instead. The sickness has passed? Abigail placed a hand on her stomach, where the slightest rounding had begun. For now. Mrs. Jensen says it often improves in the middle months. An awkward silence fell between them, the unresolved tension from their argument in the logging shed still present despite the days between. I've been thinking, Silas began hesitantly, about what you said, about not knowing each other. I spoke in anger, she said quickly. No, you spoke truth. He looked down at his hands. I've kept myself closed off since Catherine died. Easier that way. No one to disappoint. No one to lose. The admission clearly cost him effort. Abigail waited, sensing he had more to say. I don't want to be that man anymore, he continued quietly. The one who can't trust, can't connect. His eyes found hers. When I thought I might die from the fever, it wasn't Catherine I saw. It was you, walking away with our child. Her breath caught. Our child. Any child raised under my roof, bearing my name, is mine in every way that matters. His gaze held steady. If you'll stay. Before Abigail could respond, the door flew open. Mrs. Jensen hurried in, her usual calm replaced by urgency. Riders coming, she announced. 6 men with tracking dogs. Abigail's heart plummeted. They found us. Not yet, the widow replied grimly. But soon enough if you stay. Silas struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. We need to go. You can barely stand, Abigail protested. There's no time to argue, Mrs. Jensen interrupted, already gathering supplies into a pack. My root cellar has a tunnel. Lars built it during the Indian Troubles, leads to the creek bed half a mile back. Follow the water north until you reach the old trapper's cabin. You'll find supplies there. Why are you helping us? Silas asked, allowing Abigail to help him into his coat. The widow's eyes hardened. 20 years ago, a posse came through here hunting a young Blackfoot boy accused of stealing horses. Lars hid him in that same tunnel while I served coffee to his pursuers. They hung that boy when they caught him 3 days later. She thrust the packed bag into Abigail's hands. Not going to let that happen again. As they prepared to leave, hoofbeats sounded in the distance. Mrs. Jensen pulled up a trapdoor hidden beneath a rug, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. Go now, she urged. I'll delay them. They might hurt you, Abigail worried. I'm a respectable widow with a shotgun and no patience for foolishness. The older woman smiled grimly. They'll mind their manners. Impulsively, Abigail hugged her. Thank you for everything. Silas extended his good hand to the widow. We owe you a debt we can't repay. Then don't try, Mrs. Jensen replied. Just live well enough to deserve your second chance. They descended into the cool darkness, hearing the trapdoor close above them. A lantern hung on a hook near the bottom step. Silas lit it, revealing a narrow dirt tunnel braced with timbers. "Can you manage?" Abigail asked, eyeing his weakened state. Determination hardened his features. "I have to." The tunnel stretched ahead, their path to freedom or capture. Their future uncertain but facing it side by side. "Did you mean what you said up there?" Abigail asked as they moved forward. "About the child?" Silas reached for her hand in the dim light. "Every word. Watson may have fathered it, but I intend to be its father in every way that matters." He paused, gathering courage. "If you'll have me, not just as a convenient protector or a name on paper, but as a true husband." Above them, they heard muffled voices as riders reached the farmhouse. Below, in the shadows of their uncertain escape, something new blossomed between them, stronger than arrangement, deeper than gratitude, more enduring than convenience. "Yes," Abigail whispered, squeezing his hand. "Not because I need protection, but because I've come to love the man who offered it so freely. I'll create Acts 7 and 8 with approximately 1,200 words each, following your guidelines for engaging storytelling with accessible language and varied conflicts." "Where are they?" Sheriff Holloway's voice boomed above them, muffled by earth and floorboards yet still menacing enough to freeze Abigail mid-step. "Who?" Mrs. Jensen's innocent reply carried clearly through the packed dirt ceiling of the tunnel. "The murderers you're harboring. Mind your tone in my house, young man." The widow's voice turned flinty. "The only visitors I've had this week were a traveling preacher and his wife, both elderly. Left yesterday heading east." The tunnel stretched before them, a narrow passage of packed earth barely wide enough for their shoulders. Lantern light cast giant shadows that danced along the rough walls. Silas's breathing came labored and shallow, each step a battle against his weakening body. "She's buying us time," he whispered, urging Abigail forward. "We need to move." The path sloped gently downward. Water began seeping through the earthen walls, turning the floor muddy. After what felt like endless minutes in the suffocating passage, they reached a wooden door reinforced with metal bands. "Creek entrance," Silas guessed, struggling with the rusted latch. The door finally gave way with a groan that seemed thunderous in the confined space. Cold, fresh air rushed in, carrying the gurgling sound of running water. They emerged onto a narrow creek bank partially sheltered by overhanging tree roots and tangled brush. "Which way is north?" Abigail asked, extinguishing the lantern. Silas studied the gray winter sky, finding the sun's position through thin clouds. "That way," he pointed upstream. "Stay in the water when you can. It'll hide our tracks." Moving in the shallow creek proved painfully slow. The icy water numbed their feet while slippery rocks threatened to topple them with each step. Twice Silas stumbled, his injured arm unable to catch his balance, sending him sprawling into the freezing current. Each time Abigail helped him rise, her own strength flagging as the hours passed. "We need to rest," she insisted when his face had gone ghost white with exhaustion. "Not yet," he pushed on stubbornly. "Need more distance." The winter sun had begun its early descent when they heard it, the baying of hounds, distant but unmistakable. "The dogs picked up our scent," Silas muttered, a new urgency overriding his fatigue. "The creek won't fool them for long." They pushed forward with renewed determination, the sound of pursuit driving them despite burning muscles and frozen extremities. As darkness approached, snow began falling again, light flurries that gradually intensified. "There!" Abigail spotted it first, a small structure nestled among pines ahead. The trapper's cabin. Unlike the decrepit shelter they'd found during the blizzard, this cabin stood solid and well-maintained. A padlock secured the door, but Silas found the key beneath a hollow log as Mrs. Jensen had instructed. Inside, the single room offered simple comforts: a stone fireplace, wooden bunk with straw mattress, table with 2 chairs, and shelves stocked with preserved food and supplies. Most precious of all, dry firewood stacked neatly beside the hearth. Abigail immediately set about building a fire while Silas secured the door and shuttered the single window. The dog's barking had faded. Whether thrown off by the creek or delayed by the increasing snowfall, they couldn't be sure. We may have lost them, Silas said cautiously, sinking onto the bunk, his remaining strength finally deserting him. For tonight at least, Abigail agreed, coaxing flames from kindling. This snow will cover our tracks if it keeps up. Soon, blessed warmth spread through the cabin. They shed their wet outer garments, hanging them near the fire to dry. Abigail found a kettle and melted snow for tea, then explored the cabin's provisions. Look at this, she called, holding up a crude map found among the supplies. Mrs. Jensen must have left it. It shows the route to the Canadian border crossings. Silas studied it with feverish intensity. 3 days hard travel in good conditions. Which these aren't, Abigail pointed out, gesturing to his wounded shoulder and the snowstorm outside. We'll manage. His jaw set stubbornly. Silas. She sat beside him, taking his hand. You're burning with fever again. The infection is returning. We need to rest here until you're stronger. He started to protest, but she placed her fingers against his lips. You promised to protect us, she reminded him gently. You can't do that if you're dead from pushing too hard. The fight drained from him. 2 days, he compromised. Then we move on regardless. True to his stubborn nature, Silas insisted on leaving at dawn on the 3rd day, though his condition had barely improved. The storm had passed, leaving pristine white landscapes stretching endlessly ahead. According to the map, they needed to follow the creek another 10 miles to its junction with a larger river, then travel along the riverbank to reach a ferry crossing near the border. They fashioned crude snowshoes from branches and rawhide found in the cabin, making travel through the deep snow somewhat easier. Still, each step required enormous effort. By midday, Silas was leaning heavily on a walking stick, his face gray with exhaustion, while Abigail fought her own battle against mounting fatigue. Just over that ridge, he encouraged when she needed to rest for the 3rd time that hour. The river should be visible from there. She nodded wordlessly, one hand resting on her growing middle. The baby had been active that morning, a fluttering sensation still new enough to startle her, a reminder of what they fought for with each painful step. The sun had begun its descent when they crested the ridge, revealing not just the promised river but an unexpected sight beyond it. A small settlement, perhaps 24 buildings clustered near the water's edge. Smoke rose from several chimneys, promising warmth and civilization. Careful, Silas cautioned as hope brightened Abigail's face. Could be friendly, could be trouble. Before they could decide how to approach, fate intervened. A sharp crack split the air as the ground beneath Silas gave way, snow concealing a steep drop-off. He vanished with barely a shout, tumbling down the embankment in a shower of snow and loose rocks. Silas! Abigail screamed, scrambling carefully toward the edge. He lay 30 feet below, motionless on the frozen ground. Fresh blood stained the snow beneath his injured shoulder. Despite her awkward snowshoes and growing belly, Abigail picked her way down the slope, slipping and sliding until she reached him. To her immense relief, he groaned when she touched his face. My leg, he mumbled, trying to sit up. Think it's broken. She helped him into a sitting position, confirming his assessment. His right leg bent at an unnatural angle just below the knee, the broken bone thankfully not piercing the skin. I need to get help, she said, glancing toward the distant settlement. No. His hand clutched her arm with surprising strength. Too dangerous. People talk. Word spreads. You'll die out here, she argued, tears freezing on her cheeks. I won't let that happen. Better me than you, he whispered, fever making his eyes unnaturally bright. No, not better. Not acceptable. She stood, decision made. I'll bring help back. Trust me, Silas. Before he could protest further, she began making her way toward the settlement, her snowshoes leaving distinctive tracks in the pristine white powder. The sun touched the horizon as she approached the first buildings, casting long blue shadows across her path. The settlement proved to be a small trading post, primarily a general store, saloon, stable, and handful of cabins clustered around a central square. Few people moved about in the bitter cold, but smoke rose cheerfully from the chimney of the largest building, marked with a faded sign, Larson's General Merchandise and Post. Taking a deep breath, Abigail pushed open the door. Warmth and the smell of coffee enveloped her. 3 men seated near a pot-bellied stove turned to stare at her unexpected entrance, conversation dying mid-sentence. Behind a counter, an older man with spectacles perched on his nose regarded her with surprise. "Help?" she managed, her frozen lips struggling to form words. "My husband. He's hurt." One of the men, younger than the others, with a kind face beneath his beard, immediately stood. "Where is he, ma'am?" "Ridge overlooking the river," she pointed vaguely. "Fell. Broken leg. Fever." "Jonas, fetch the sled," the shopkeeper ordered. "Ethan, get Doc Winters." Within minutes, a rescue party organized itself. Abigail found herself wrapped in a warm blanket, a cup of hot coffee pressed into her trembling hands, as 4 men prepared to follow her tracks back to Silas. "What brings you folks out here this time of year?" the shopkeeper asked conversationally as they waited for the sled to be readied. Abigail hesitated, remembering Silas's fear. "Traveling to family in Canada," she said carefully. "My husband's cousin has a farm near the border." "Long journey for a lady in your condition," he observed, nodding toward her midsection. "Necessary journey," she replied, offering no elaboration. Something in her tone discouraged further questions. When the rescue party signaled readiness, Abigail moved to join them, but the kind-faced younger man, Jonas, stopped her. "Best you wait here, ma'am. We'll bring your husband back safe." Too exhausted to argue, she nodded grateful acceptance. An hour later, the shopkeeper's wife had settled Abigail in a small back room warmed by the store's main chimney. She dozed fitfully until shouting outside announced the rescue party's return. Men carried Silas in, his face alarmingly pale against the blood and dirt. A white-haired man directed them to place him on a table. "I'm Doc Winters," he introduced himself to Abigail. "Your husband's in rough shape, Mrs. Reed," she supplied. "Abigail Reed." The doctor nodded absently, already examining Silas's broken leg. "The break's clean. Shoulders infected something fierce, though." He glanced at her worried face. "I need to set the bone and clean that wound properly. It'll be painful. Perhaps you'd prefer to wait outside." "I'll stay," she said firmly, moving to Silas's side to take his hand. His eyes fluttered open, recognition dawning through the haze of pain. "You came back," he murmured. "Always," she whispered. "We're going to be all right now." As the doctor prepared his instruments, Silas squeezed her hand weakly. "How much did you tell them?" "Only that we're traveling to your cousin's farm," she assured him. "Nothing more." Relief flooded his features before pain overtook him again as the doctor began his work. Spring painted the valley with wildflowers when Abigail first felt the labor pains. 9 months to the day since that terrible night with Watson, though she preferred to mark time differently now. 5 months since Silas had offered his name, for since they'd fled prosperity. 3 since they'd found this peaceful place to heal and prepare. The trading post community of Riverview had become an unexpected haven. After Silas's injuries healed enough for travel, they'd asked directions to his cousin's farm, only to discover Isaac Reed had sold his property 2 years earlier and moved farther north into Canada proper. With no specific destination remaining and Abigail's condition advancing, they'd accepted the shopkeeper's offer to rent a small vacant cabin on the settlement's edge. Winter had made further travel impractical anyway, and by the time spring arrived, they'd put down tentative roots. Silas found work at the sawmill across the river, his experience valuable despite his still healing leg that would likely always carry a slight limp. Abigail took in sewing and helped the shopkeeper's wife with bookkeeping, her neat handwriting and quick mind with figures earning respect in the small community. No one asked too many questions about their past. Frontier settlements attracted people seeking fresh starts, and respectful discretion was an unwritten rule. They were simply Mr. and Mrs. Reed, hard-working newcomers expecting their first child. Now that child was coming, announcing its imminent arrival with waves of pain that left Abigail breathless. "It's time," she told Silas when he returned from work that evening, finding her leaning against the table, face contorted. Fear and determination battled across his features as he helped her to their bed, then ran for Martha Larson, the shopkeeper's wife who had assisted at many births before. The labor proved long and difficult. Through the night and into the following day, Abigail fought to bring this new life into the world. Silas refused to leave her side despite Martha's insistence that men traditionally waited elsewhere. "I won't lose you both," he whispered when pain made Abigail cry out. "Stay with me." As afternoon shadows lengthened, her strength began failing. The baby remained stubbornly lodged despite hours of pushing. Martha's worried face told Silas what the woman wouldn't say aloud. History threatened to repeat itself. "Get the doctor," he ordered, his voice cracking. "Now." "He's across the river," Martha protested. "Won't be back until—" "Get him," Silas roared, terror making him fierce. "I don't care if you have to drag him across yourself. Get him here now." While the woman hurried to obey, Silas knelt beside Abigail, taking her hand. "Listen to me," he urged, bringing his face close to hers. "You're the strongest person I've ever known. You survived Watson. You survived the mob. You saved us both in that blizzard and again at Widow Jensen's." "I can't," she whimpered, exhaustion claiming her. "Too tired." "Yes, you can." He squeezed her hand. "You promised to stay with me, remember? In that tunnel, you said you loved me. I'm holding you to that." Her eyes found his, drawing strength from his desperate faith. "I do love you." "Then fight," he begged. "Fight for us. For our family." The doctor arrived in a flurry of activity, assessing the situation quickly. "The baby's turned wrong," he announced after examining her. "I need to reach in and adjust its position." What followed tested the limits of Abigail's endurance. The pain became unimaginable as the doctor worked to turn the infant. Silas held her through it all, his whispered encouragement her lifeline to consciousness. Then suddenly a shift, a change, and her body knew what to do again. 3 more pushes brought their son into the world, tiny but perfect, announcing his arrival with a lusty cry that brought tears streaming down Silas's face. "A boy," the doctor announced, placing the squirming infant on Abigail's chest. "Strong lungs on that one." Abigail gazed down at the miracle in her arms, red-faced, dark-haired, perfect in every way. Not Watson's child, not a burden or reminder of violence. Her son, their son. "James," she whispered, a name they'd agreed upon weeks earlier. "James Reed." Silas touched the baby's tiny hand with wonder. When the tiny fingers instinctively curled around his calloused thumb, something final and permanent shifted in his heart. "Hello, James," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "I'm your father." The words held no qualification, no hesitation. In that moment, blood and biology became irrelevant compared to the love already flooding his heart. Summer passed in a blur of adjustment and wonder. James thrived, growing stronger daily. The small cabin expanded with a new room Silas built on evenings and weekends, giving the family more space. Autumn painted the surrounding hills with brilliant color when the letter arrived. Doc Winters handed it to Silas after church one Sunday, explaining it had been forwarded through several post offices before reaching them. "From Montana Territory," the doctor noted. "Thought you might want this privately." Silas stared at the envelope, his heart racing. Only one person in Montana knew their location, Clara Johnson, to whom Abigail had sent a single carefully worded letter months earlier, seeking news. He waited until they returned home, James sleeping peacefully in his cradle, before showing Abigail the letter. "Should we open it?" she asked, fear evident in her voice. "What if they're still looking for us?" "We need to know," he replied simply. With trembling fingers, he broke the seal and unfolded the pages covered in Clara's neat handwriting. "Dear friends," he read aloud, "I pray this finds you well and safe. Much has changed here since your departure. Sheriff Holloway suffered a riding accident 2 months after you left. His replacement reopened investigation into Mr. Watson's death after several women, came forward with similar stories of his unwanted attentions. Abigail gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Silas continued reading. Most significantly, Watson's brother finally admitted on his deathbed that Walter confessed to attacking you. He had kept silent out of family loyalty. The new sheriff has officially ruled the death accidental self-defense, closing the case permanently. Tears streamed down Abigail's face as the weight of fear she'd carried for so long began lifting. There's more, Silas said, scanning ahead. The mill closed as predicted. Many families have moved on. Prosperity is half the size it was. Clara herself has married and moved to Helena. And... He paused, a strange expression crossing his face. Mrs. Jensen sends her regards. Says her cellar door is always open should we ever need shelter again. We're free, Abigail whispered, the realization dawning slowly. We could go anywhere now. Silas set the letter aside, moving to the window where afternoon sunlight streamed in, illuminating the simple home they'd created. Outside, the small garden she'd planted flourished. Beyond that, the river flowed steadily northward. In the distance, the sawmill where he'd found respect and fair wages hummed with activity. We could, he agreed, turning back to her. But I've been thinking. He crossed to a small carved wooden box on the mantel, his handiwork, created during long winter evenings. From it, he removed something that glinted in the sunlight. I made this, he said, holding out a simple gold band. It's not as fine as a store-bought ring, but I shaped it myself. Confusion crossed Abigail's face. But we're already married. We were married for protection, he corrected gently. For necessity. Now we have choices. He knelt before her, taking her hand. I want to marry you again, Abigail. Not because you need my name as a shield, but because I love you. Because the life we've built together is better than any I could have imagined. Emotion overwhelmed her. This man who had started as her reluctant protector now looked at her with such devotion it stole her breath. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit this time, made with careful measurements taken while she slept. From his cradle, James began to fuss. Abigail lifted him, bringing him to Silas's waiting arms. The baby smiled up at his father, a toothless grin that never failed to melt Silas's heart. He looks like you around the eyes, Silas observed, a familiar debate between them. And has your stubborn chin, she countered, leaning against his shoulder. They stood together by the window, bathed in golden afternoon light, a family created not by blood but by choice, by sacrifice, by love that had grown slowly from the seeds of desperation into something enduring and true. Outside, the future stretched before them, unknown but no longer frightening. Whatever came, they would face it together, just as they had faced every challenge since that fateful night when he had given her his name to shield her, never imagining she would give him a son and a second chance at life in return.